Hey guys, Sherm here, and today I'm going to be testing the new Paris track in Asphalt 9 multiplayer. Please consider subscribing if you have not already, and be sure to check out my Furum Clips channel, Furum TV channel, Purple Team Discord. Links to all those will be down in the description, and I hope you enjoy the video. So today I'm going to be showing you all 4 of the variants of this track that were introduced in the current multiplayer 1 season. Now, there are definitely, I would assume, more variants than these, but these are all the only ones that are in this season that we've been able to play on so far. I'll be using 6 different cars, 3 in A-Class and 3 in S-Class, to give you a good idea of how different cars will perform on different variants of this track. Now, so far, I'm sure you've seen one issue already with this track, which is the ramps. As with many of the other more recent tracks in the game, the barrel roll ramps are not as curved as I would like. This leads to some cases where if you go just slightly too low, you may risk landing on your top. But then, of course, if you try to overcompensate and go a little higher, you risk losing a bunch of speed, as I did on the first ramp on this track. Now, of course, as you could see toward the end there, I was able to take some ramps just fine, but it's just a little finicky, which is not something I enjoy because I have landed on my top a few times from ramps on this track. But I don't want to just list negatives. I do enjoy this track quite a lot overall. I enjoy the wide curves. We don't really have any super tight hairpin ones. We have a couple, but I'll get to that later. And on some variants, there are a number of places that are fairly long and straight that high top speed cars will be able to keep their high top speed on. Now, unfortunately, there are not quite enough of those for this to be considered a top speed oriented track. In fact, I actually did have better luck on this track with some of the more agile cars, like, say, this Aperta here, or cars that are just more well-rounded in general. Not necessarily the Corvette, that's going a bit too far, I would think. But the thing is, even though there are a lot of these long straighter sections, most of the track is actually curves. Not sharp curves, but you do get quite a lot where you're pretty much just always turning, at least a little bit. And if you are doing that, in a high-speed car like the Tuatara, which we will see later in this video, it is difficult to actually gain a lot of speed, even though the track might look like it is made for cars like those. Right here, these are the few kind of hairpin curves that I was talking about earlier. They're not as tight as the ones on Greenland, thankfully, and they're fairly easy to get around in almost every car. I didn't really have any issues with them, but it is something to keep in mind. Now here, it is better to not fall off to the right so that you can take this first turn over to the right here. If you go down below and take the ramp up, you're forced onto the left path, which is a good bit longer, and I don't think it is worth it for the slight extra airspeed. This section is one of the coolest parts in the track, a long straight section underneath the Eiffel Tower to come in first place, and that was one of the longer variants, actually, of this track that we got to see in this multiplayer season. For example, this next variant that we're going to see here, our third one, is about half as long as that one was just then. Overall, Paris reminds me a ton of New York in both good ways and bad ways. It has the same sort of variation in some of the straighter sections and then some of the more tight sections. New York kind of does it a little bit differently though, where it has a bunch of super straight parts and then like a bunch of 90-degree turns right after one another. Here, it's all kind of just more curvy-ish in general. And I would say that New York is slightly more top speed oriented than Paris overall. Cars like the Tuatara and the Jesko will likely be slightly more consistent there. On Paris, the cars that I would most likely take out and the ones that I had the most consistency with throughout the season are just the more well-rounded ones, like the Aperta, like the Huayra, like the Speedtail, as we will see later. You pretty much want a car that is at least average, or most likely above average in all aspects. You don't really want to take cars that much that have, I guess, very extreme stats, like some big weak spots, but some super strong spots. They just won't be as consistent here. Now moving on to the S-Class cars, first of which is the Speedtail. And this is a prime example of a track where the Speedtail will do extremely well. The top speed is amazing on this car, and even though it's not as good as something like the Tuatara or whatever, as we will see in our next race, the Tuatara doesn't actually get up to its top speed all that often, so the Speedtail's 270 is perfectly enough. Also, this car has really good drifting. The acceleration and nitro are also good enough to keep it toward its higher end of speed for a lot of the track. And although, I was battling some Huracans here at the beginning, I was able to pull ahead of them later on. In this train section here, I try to stay away from the trains as much as I can because sometimes they can slow you down if you get too close to them, and I haven't quite yet figured out when they speed you up and when they slow you down. But if you take that route through there, you'll be able to pick up most of the yellow nitro and still take a pretty good racing line. And then around here, if you have a high top speed car, you can go up this ramp to gain much of your speed before trying to take this turn, which you can do in the Speedtail very easily without hitting the sides. This track almost feels like it was made for this car. It just works so well on it. The other thing that New York and Paris have in common is just the overall look of them. They have a very almost gray feel, sort of overcast, and yet at the same time there are these pops of color with the tree since it's in the fall, and then here the blue and pink along the sides and the tents and everything. And so overall, I do think it is a very nice looking track. The only real big complaint I have there is just some of the streets kind of run together. Almost all the buildings feel like they look the same. So that's maybe one little thing. But other than that, not really too much in terms of looks that I can think of. Now, at that place back there, you are able to gain a lot of speed actually on that barrel roll. However, you can only take that barrel roll if you go the longer way that I did there. This is the same variant as I played with the Huayra earlier, where I went on the shorter route, but I didn't get the barrel roll. So it's maybe possible that it's better for higher top speed cars to take the slightly longer route to get that barrel and a higher top speed to that section. I don't know. I'll be really interested to see how that turns out with different testing and things like that. We are able to come in first here. However, it is worth noting that Galeson Chai, another Legions Unite member, was able to come in a very close second with his 007S. And I think that is something you will see a lot on this track. There are some sections where higher top speed cars will pull ahead. Then around some of the twistier sections where you have to drift a lot, you will see some of those more handling oriented cars catch up. Now, if you go to the right at this intersection here, which I do not recommend since it seems slower, you are able to go through a tiny little building shortcut where there is a Gameloft like little studio thingy inside with a couple of almost player characters that look like they're the avatars from Asphalt 8. Little funny Easter egg, definitely go that way a couple times to see them, but overall, not the fastest route, although not too much slower. And that's the other thing, most of the different ways that you can take on this track aren't a whole lot longer or shorter than others. Like through here, there's like 3 different routes that you can take, but they're all fairly identical, and you can almost take any of them and still do fairly well. And that concludes my review of Paris. Definitely let me know down in the comments below what you think of the track. Thank you all so much for watching. Please like the video if you've enjoyed, and consider subscribing for more Asphalt, Forza, Minecraft, and other games content. And I will see you in my next video. Goodbye!